Imagine the vastness of the open plains stretching endlessly beneath a molten sky, the air trembling with heat and the faint metallic scent of dust carried on the wind. You hear it before you see it, the slow rhythm of hooves striking the earth, a heartbeat of the land itself, rising and falling like breath. The year is 1871, and the cattle drives have begun again. Thousands of longhorns are being herded north from Texas to Kansas, their horns gleaming like ivory against the sun, their low, rumbling calls blending with the sigh of the prairie. You can almost feel the grit between your teeth, the sting of wind-blown sand against your skin, and the weight of the saddle beneath you, creaking softly with every breath your horse takes. Life in the cowboy trail is not what the stories later made it. No romantic duels or easy sunsets. It is hunger, silence, and the taste of dust in your mouth before dawn. If you're listening now, lying in the quiet of your room, imagine this. You wake before the sun rises, the world still half asleep, and the only light is the orange flicker of a dying campfire. The air is sharp and cold, smelling faintly of ash and horse sweat. Around you, men stir in their blankets, muttering low, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. These are cowboys, not gunslingers or outlaws, but the bone and sinew of the frontier. Most are young, barely 20, former soldiers, drifters, freedmen, and immigrants from Ireland or Mexico. They come because there's nothing else to come to, no land, no future, just the promise of $1 a day and the illusion of freedom under an endless sky. You pull on your boots, still damp with dew. The leather bites at your heels, the chill waking your bones. Someone hands you a tin cup of coffee, bitter, thick, and black as tar. You drink it slow, feeling the warmth crawl down your chest. The cook, old and bent, stirs the pot of beans from last night, humming something that sounds like a prayer. The smell of smoke and burnt bacon fills the air. Far off, the cattle shift restlessly, a sea of movement and sound, their hides glistening in the pale morning light. The trail boss, a man called Reese, rides past, his silhouette framed against the dawn. His face is hard as the land itself, eyes the color of dry stone. "Mount up," he says, voice calm, but his tone leaves no room for hesitation. You swing into the saddle, feeling the horse's muscles tighten beneath you. The reins are rough against your fingers, the leather warm from the animal's breath. As the herd begins to move, the ground trembles. Dust rises in thick clouds, turning the sky a dull gold. The sun climbs higher, and soon the heat presses down like a hand on your back. Flies buzz around your face, drawn by the sweat and the smell of cattle. You ride for hours, maybe days. Time dissolves on the trail. Every sound is part of the rhythm. The lowing of cows, the creak of wagon wheels, the occasional curse when a steer breaks away. You chase it down, your horse leaping over gullies and brush, your hat nearly torn from your head by the wind. For a brief moment, you feel alive, wild, but that passes. There's always another mile, another day. The prairie is both beautiful and merciless. The grass waves like the sea, and at dusk, the sky burns red and violet. You eat when you can, sleep when you can, and pray the weather holds. Sometimes the storms roll in without warning. You see the lightning flash miles away, jagged lines splitting the horizon. The cattle sense it before you do. They grow restless, eyes wide, bodies shifting like waves before tempest. Then it hits, wind that howls like a living thing, rain slashing at your face, thunder shaking the ground beneath you. The herd panics, bolts into the dark. You can hear the stampede before you see it, a roar of hooves, a wall of sound that drowns out everything else. You ride into it, shouting, waving your hat, desperate to turn them before they crush you all. The world becomes chaos. Flashes of lightning, screams of men and beasts, the pounding rhythm of death itself. When it's over, the silence feels almost holy. You sit on your horse, chest heaving, drenched in mud and rain. Around you, shapes emerge from the gloom. The others, faces pale, eyes wide with exhaustion. Some of the cattle lie broken, necks twisted, bodies still steaming in the cold. Reese rides up beside you. Could have been worse, he mutters. His voice is steady, but you see his hands tremble as he lights a cigarette. The smell of tobacco cuts through the damp air. You wonder how many more nights like this you can survive. The days blur into each other. The sky, the wind, the endless motion of hooves. The monotony becomes a kind of trance. Sometimes you hum to yourself, old songs your mother used to sing, or ones you've picked up from others. The men tell stories at night, their voices low, as if afraid the darkness might steal their words. Tales of the war, of lost loves, of towns they'll never see again. Someone passes around a flask, the whiskey burning sweet and rough in your throat. You laugh a little, but it doesn't last. The stars are so clear here, they almost hurt to look at, each one a cold fire in the black. One night, as you lie awake, staring at that infinite sky, you realize how small you are, how all of this, the trail, the cattle, the endless work, is just a moment passing through the world's great indifference. By the time you reach Abilene, your face is cracked from sun and wind, your hands blistered, your clothes stiff with sweat and dust. The town is a blur of noise and color, saloons spilling music into the streets, laughter sharp as broken glass, the smell of whiskey and perfume mingling with manure and gun oil. It feels unreal after weeks of silence. Men stumble out of bars, women in bright dresses call for balconies, and someone plays a piano that's just slightly out of tune. You stand there for a while, feeling the ground still sway beneath you, as if the earth itself is moving with the herd. Reese hands you your pay, $40 for 2 months. You stare at it, unsure what to do. Some men head straight for the gambling tables. Others find warmth in a woman's arms. You walk alone down the muddy street, past the lights and noise, until the sound fades. There's a quiet here behind the buildings, where the air smells of hay and old wood. You find a small stable, sit on a bale of straw, and listen to the horses breathing softly in the dark. You think of home, though you're not sure where that is anymore. Maybe you never had one. Maybe it's just the horizon, that endless line that always moves away as you chase it. Somewhere in the distance, a gunshot echoes, followed by laughter. You sigh and close your eyes. Tomorrow, you'll ride again, maybe north, maybe west. The trail never really ends. It just shifts like the wind. But tonight, the air is still, and for a moment, you let yourself rest. You don't know yet that soon, everything will change, that the open plains will begin to close, the railroads spreading like veins of iron across the land, bringing new people, new laws, and the slow death of the cowboy's way. But that's a story for another night. For now, as the candle burns low and the stars fade behind thin clouds, you breathe in the scent of leather and dust and dream of the trail. Because somewhere out there, beyond the dark, the West is still wild, and it's calling your name. The morning after Abilene wakes like a hangover. The sound of wagons rattling on the muddy street, the shrill whinny of horses, the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing against the pale light of dawn. The air is heavy with the smell of stale whiskey, manure, and frying bacon from a nearby saloon kitchen. You sit on the wooden steps outside the livery, boots caked in dirt, your body aching as if the trail itself still clings to your bones. The money in your pocket feels like both a blessing and a curse. $40 that could vanish as quickly as smoke if you stepped into the wrong room or looked someone in the eye too long. Around you, the town hums, men shouting over prices, women sweeping porches, dogs nosing through garbage. A gust of wind carries the sound of laughter from the saloon, that hollow kind of laughter that always ends in trouble. Reese is already gone, off to meet another cattle owner down south, and most of the crew has scattered like dust after a stampede. You realize then that the trail is more home than any town could ever be. The silence of the plains, the slow rhythm of hooves, even the danger, it all feels more honest than this place where everyone hides behind a smile. You stand, stretch your sore back, and walk toward the general store. The bell above the door rings softly, and the smell of sawdust and leather hits you. Comforting, familiar. The shopkeeper, a thin man with silver hair and spectacles, looks up. "You one of Reese's boys?" he asks, his voice calm, eyes sharp. You nod, picking up a coil of rope, a new hat, a bar of soap that smells faintly of pine. "Trail season's ending," he says, counting out your coins. "They say the railroad's reaching Dodge by spring. Won't be much need for long drives then." You pause, feeling a strange weight in his words. The trail ending? It seems impossible. But change, like the weather, doesn't ask permission. Outside, a train whistle sounds far away, faint but steady. The world is moving faster now, iron and steam replacing muscle and dust. You walk out into the sunlight, the brim of your hat shading your eyes. A boy sits by the water trough, carving something from wood. They say there's work west. He mutters when you ask where folks are heading. Mining, maybe rail laying. Cowboys ain't needed no more. You thank him and keep walking, the words sticking like thorns. By noon, you find yourself back at the edge of town. The wind carries the scent of the open prairie, dry and sweet. You can almost hear the faint echo of hooves, the low murmur of cattle, and something inside you aches. So you saddle up again, your horse shifting beneath you, impatient to move. You ride out past the last fences, where the grass grows tall and gold under the sun. The land stretches wide and endless, like a sea of silence. For hours you ride without speaking, the sound of the wind the only companion. As evening falls, you find a creek and make camp. The sky glows with orange and violet fire, fading into the deep indigo of night. You build a small fire, its smoke curling lazily upward. The crackle of wood is soothing, and the stars blink awake one by one. You boil coffee in a blackened tin pot, the bitter scent mixing with the damp smell of earth. The first sip burns your tongue, and you smile. It tastes like the road, harsh but honest. Somewhere nearby, a coyote howls, the sound long and mournful. You feel a shiver despite the warmth of the flames. The loneliness of the plains presses close, soft but heavy, like a blanket woven from silence. You remember faces, men from the drive, some dead, some gone. You think of the boy in town, his small hands carving away, shaping a piece of wood into a horse maybe, or a dream of one. You wonder if he'll ever know what it meant to ride free under these skies, before fences cut the land into squares and rules replaced instinct. The next morning, the air is cool and sharp. You follow the creek north until it bends toward a narrow valley where the grass is greener. Smoke rises in the distance, a homestead, maybe a ranch. As you approach, you see a woman standing by a fence, her dress plain but clean, her hair tied back. She watches you for a moment, cautious. "You passing through?" she asks. Her voice is steady, but you can hear the weariness beneath it. You nod. "Looking for work," you reply. She hesitates, then points toward the barn. "Talk to my husband. We lost a hand last month." You ride in slow, the smell of hay and animals thick in the air. The man inside is tall, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes hard but not unkind. "Name's Calder," he says. "You can help mend fences if you don't mind long days." You don't mind. Anything to keep moving, to keep from thinking. The days become a rhythm again, rising before dawn, working till sunset, sleeping under the creak of wooden beams. Calder doesn't talk much, but his wife, Mary, brings you meals and sometimes lingers to ask about the trail. You tell her little pieces, the storms, the stars, the way the world feels when all you hear is the sound of cattle and wind. She listens quietly, her hands folded, eyes distant, as if seeing it all through your words. One night, she brings a small lamp out to the porch where you sit sharpening your knife. "They say more settlers are coming," she murmurs. "Railroad men bought the land east of here. They'll cut it up, make towns." You nod, the blade glinting in the lamplight. "World's getting smaller," you say. "Soon there'll be no room to ride." She looks at you then, her face soft in the glow. "Maybe, but people will still need stories about those who did." Her words linger long after she goes inside. Stories. Maybe that's all that'll remain when the dust settles, when the trails fade into history. Weeks pass. You mend fences, drive stray cattle, help build a new corral. The work is hard but steady. The air smells of grass and wood smoke, and the nights are calm. You almost begin to believe you could stay. But one evening, as the sun sinks red behind the hills, a rider comes. His horse lathered with sweat, eyes wild. He calls for Calder, his voice tight with fear. "Bandits," he gasps. "They hit the wagon train by the crossing. Took everything, killed 2 men." Calder curses under his breath, grabs his rifle. You feel something stir inside you, that old, restless pulse of the trail. You saddle up without thinking. The air is electric with urgency as a few men from nearby ranches gather. Lanterns flicker, guns glint, and the horses snort impatiently. You ride into the night, the moon a pale ghost above the plains. The wind smells of dust and gunpowder. When you reach the crossing, the scene is chaos. Wagons overturned, crates scattered, blood darkening the dirt. You dismount, your boots sinking into the mud. The silence is heavy, broken only by the groan of wood and the distant cry of a night bird. One of the men kneels by a body, shaking his head. "They headed west," he says, pointing toward the hills. Without a word, you mount again. The chase begins. Hours blur. The sky lightens with dawn as you follow faint tracks through the grass. At last, in a dry ravine, you spot smoke, a small camp half hidden among rocks. You and the others spread out, moving quiet as ghosts. Your heart pounds, your palms slick on the rifle. The air is thick with tension, the smell of horses and sweat. A shout breaks the silence, then gunfire. The crack of rifles echoes through the canyon, the sound sharp and final. You see flashes, a man falling, another running. The world narrows to sound and motion, the recoil biting into your shoulder. When it ends, the air tastes of smoke and metal. The bandits are dead or gone. The men around you breathe hard, faces pale. Calder stands beside you, his expression unreadable. "You done this before," he says quietly. You nod, eyes still on the horizon. "Too many times." The ride back is silent. The sun climbs, and the land glows gold again, as if nothing happened. But something inside you has shifted. You realize the West isn't wild anymore. It's wounded. And maybe so are you. Back at the ranch, Mary meets you at the gate, her eyes searching yours. You say nothing, just hand her the rifle and walk past into the fields. The grass moves gently in the breeze, and for a moment, you think you hear the distant lowing of cattle, like ghosts calling from another life. That night, lying under the stars, you can't sleep. You think about all the miles you've ridden, all the faces you've seen and lost. You think about the coming railroads, the fences, the towns that will rise where open land once lay. You close your eyes and see it, the iron tracks stretching across the prairie, splitting it like a scar. And in that vision, you understand. The cowboy's world is ending. But endings are only another kind of beginning. Somewhere, a whistle blows again, long and low, carrying through the night like a promise and a warning. You sit up, watching the horizon glow faintly with dawn. The fire's embers fade, the horses stir. You tighten your hat, mount, and ride east toward the sound of the coming world, toward the rail and the unknown. The wind follows you, whispering through the grass, carrying with it the ghost of the trail, the smell of dust, the taste of smoke, the sound of hooves fading slowly into history. The wind had changed by the time the next drive began, colder now, carrying with it the scent of rain and far-off snow from the northern plains. And though no one said it out loud, every man in the outfit felt it. The end of something coming, slow but certain, like the way twilight eats the edges of the day. The year was 1873, and the trail had grown longer, harder. The land seemed emptier, the silence between the ridges deeper than before. Reese had gathered a new crew, half boys who still had hope in their eyes, half men too tired to remember why they kept coming back. You rode with them again because there was nothing else to do. The money never lasted, and towns had a way of feeling smaller each time you returned. The plains still stretched wide, but fences had begun to appear, thin wire glinting in the sun, cutting through what used to be freedom. Some ranchers called it progress. You called it a cage. The herd was smaller that year, but meaner, wild longhorns that hadn't been worked in years, all muscle and temper. They spooked easy, charged quicker. The boss said it was good for a man to stay sharp, but no one laughed. The cook still hummed his quiet songs by the fire, though his hands shook more when he poured the coffee. The nights were colder now. Frost would lace the edges of your bedroll before dawn. The sky looked sharper too, stars like shards of glass against the black. Somewhere between the Red River and the Arkansas line, one of the boys, a kid named Jeb, 16 at most, went missing after a storm. They found his horse 3 miles north, reins tangled around a mesquite bush, but no sign of the kid. Some said he'd wandered off half asleep, and the prairie swallowed him. Others whispered about Comanche, though those days were mostly gone. Reese didn't say a word, just ordered the herd moving before the sun hit full. You rode silent, the ghost of that boy's voice still somewhere in the wind. The work never stopped. You woke before light, moved the herd through dust thick enough to choke on, your throat raw, your skin burned. Sometimes you forgot what month it was. The only rhythm that mattered was the one between hoofbeats and breath. When you reached the Canadian River, swollen from rain, it took 2 days to get the herd across. The water was ice, biting up to your chest, the current strong enough to pull a man under. One steer slipped and took a horse with it. You dove in without thinking, rope in hand, cold like knives slicing through you, grabbed the horse's bridle and pulled until your lungs screamed. Somehow you both made it out, shaking and half dead on the far bank. Reese looked at you and nodded once like it meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. The trail kept going. You passed ghost towns, places that had once been loud with miners or drifters, now just empty shells. Saloon doors creaking in the wind, signs faded to nothing. A dog barked once, far off, and then silence again. It made you wonder if all towns end like that, swallowed by time, until only stories remain. One night, around the fire, a man named Carson started talking about the railroad. So they were building it faster every year, iron stretching across the plains, bringing in strangers with strange rules. Won't be long before they don't need us no more, he said, spitting into the flames. No cattle drives, no open range. Just trains and fences. No one argued. You all just sat there, listening to the crackle of fire and the lowing of cattle in the dark. It was hard to imagine the world without this, without the endless sky and the quiet that came after a long day's ride. But deep down, you knew he was right. Progress didn't stop for anyone. A few weeks later, the herd reached Dodge City. The air there felt different, thicker somehow, filled with the noise 100 men shouting, horses snorting, the clang of spurs on wood. The town was alive in a way the plains never were. You rode and coated in dust, your beard rough, eyes half dead from sun. The saloons glowed like lanterns in the night, laughter spilling into the muddy streets. You could smell whiskey, sweat, and gun oil all at once. Inside the Long Branch, a piano banged out some wild tune, and women with red lips and tired eyes smiled like they meant it. You drank until your hands stopped shaking, until the sound of the trail faded. But the quiet never really left you. Even in that noise, you could still hear the wind over the grass, the call of a whippoorwill somewhere far away. You met a woman that night, a singer named Claire who said she came from St. Louis. Her voice was soft, her hair the color of chestnut, her laugh low and sad. You told her about the plains, about the stars and the stampedes, about the way dawn looked after a storm. She listened like no one else ever had. For a moment, you thought maybe you could stay. Maybe the trail had finally ended. But when the morning came, she was gone. Just her perfume left in the sheets and a note that said, "Keep writing." You folded it once and tucked it into your coat. Never spoke of her again. The next season came, and you were back on the move. Reese was older now, slower. His hair had gone gray at the edges, his hands stiff from years of rope and rain. He talked sometimes about buying land, building a small place near the river. "Ain't much," he said, "but maybe it's time to stop chasing horizons." You nodded, though you couldn't imagine it. What would a man like you do with stillness? The drive took you west this time, through country wilder than you'd ever seen. Mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the world, rivers clear and fast. The herd grazed on sweet grass, and for a while, the days felt easy. You almost forgot the fences, the railroads, the towns eating up the land. But peace never lasted long. One afternoon, a dust storm came from nowhere, a wall of brown that swallowed the sky. The wind screamed like a living thing. You couldn't see 5 feet ahead. Cattle scattered in panic, men shouting, horses bolting. The world turned to chaos. You covered your face with your bandana, eyes stinging, mouth full of grit. When it cleared hours later, the herd was gone, scattered miles in every direction. Reese sat on his horse, shoulders slumped, face caked in dirt. "We'll find him," he said, but his voice cracked on the words. It took 3 days to round them up again. 2 men never came back. You buried them under a cottonwood. No words, just a hat placed on a mound. The ground was hard, and the shovels rang against the stones. That night, the fire burned low, and no one spoke. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sound of coyotes in the distance. You thought of Jeb, of Claire, of the others lost to the trail. The West had a way of keeping its dead. When you finally reached Colorado, snow was already on the peaks, and your breath hung in clouds. Reese handed you your pay, less than usual. The ranchers said the market was falling. Too much beef, too many trains now doing the work of men. You didn't argue, just nodded, pocketed the coins, and watched him ride away into the mist. You never saw him again. You stayed in a small town called Trinidad for the winter, working odd jobs, fixing fences, mending saddles. The nights were long, the cold deep. You spent hours by the stove, staring into the fire, listening to the wind howl through the cracks. Sometimes, in the quiet, You'd hear the faint sound of hooves, though there were no horses outside. Maybe ghosts. Maybe memory. Spring came late that year. When it did, you saddled up again, out of habit more than hope. Rode east toward the plains. The land was changing fast now. Fences everywhere, towns sprouting like weeds. But once in a while, when you caught the scent of wild sage on the wind or saw the sun sink into the grasslands, for a moment it felt the same. You thought maybe the West wasn't dying after all. Maybe it was just dreaming, waiting for someone to remember. So you kept riding, chasing the last edges of that dream, one horizon after another, until the world itself ran out. And somewhere out there, beyond the towns and the fences, the wind still whispered the names of men who once rode free beneath a sky too wide to hold. By the time the year 1876 rolled around, the world had begun to close in on the riders of the open range, and though the plains still stretched out like an ocean of grass and sky, you could feel the difference in the air, something fading, something slipping through your fingers like dust. You've been riding near on 10 years by then, long enough for the trail to carve itself into your bones. The rhythm of hooves, the creak of leather, the endless wind, they've become part of you, the only language your soul understood. The herd that season belonged to a new kind of man, a rancher from Denver named Hollis, all polished boots and talk of progress. He rode with you for a day, his suit too fine for dust, his words sharp with plans of railroads and markets. "This is the future," he said, looking out over the plains. "No more drifting, no more waste. The age of the cowboy is ending, friend." You didn't answer, just watched him ride back toward his wagon, his fine white horse kicking up gold dust in the morning light. Maybe he was right, but you weren't ready to believe it. You never would be. The trail that year ran north again, through the old routes where bones of longhorns bleached in the sun and windmills spun slow over dry wells. The men were a rough mix, old hands like you and a few new boys, green as spring grass, faces too young for the eyes they carried. The cook was new too, a man named Tomas, Mexican by birth, quiet but steady, his coffee strong enough to strip paint. He hummed low songs at night, words you didn't understand but felt all the same. They spoke of loss, of love, of the kind of loneliness only the plains can make. The herd moved slow. The weather turned mean, storms rolling in from nowhere, the kind that tore the sky open with fire and rain. You lost 6 head to lightning in one night, their bodies steaming in the cold dawn, the air thick with the smell of burnt hair and wet earth. Reese would have known how to handle it, but Reese was gone, and the new boss, Hollis's foreman, was all bark and no feel. Men followed orders, but not him. They followed the land, the wind, their instincts. When the boss started pushing too hard, tempers flared. A man named Weller swung first, caught the foreman across the jaw with a fist like a hammer. The foreman went down hard, blood dark against the dirt. For a moment, you thought he'd draw his gun, but he just wiped his mouth and spat, said nothing. The next morning, Weller was gone. No one asked where. Sometimes the trail took more than it gave, and it gave little enough. Days blurred into each other. The grass changed color. The sky turned from gold to gray, and still you rode. The herd stretched for miles, a living river of muscle and horns. At night, you took first watch, eyes scanning the dark horizon for movement. Coyotes yipped somewhere far off. The stars wheeled above you, cold and sharp. You thought of the ones you'd lost, Jeb, Reese, Carson, and wondered if they still rode somewhere beyond the edge of the world, where the land never ended. One night, near the Platte River, you found an old campfire circle. Stones blackened, ashes long cold. Someone had carved a name into one of the rocks. R. Reese, 1874. You sat there a long time, the wind whispering through the grass, your fingers tracing the letters until they blurred. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. The next morning, the herd crossed the river, and you felt something shift inside you, quiet but final, like a door closing. A week later, a rider came from the east, a government man in a bowler hat, his horse sleek and clean, his coat too black for the dust. He carried papers and spoke with authority, saying the open range was being divided, land claims and barbed wire going up faster than anyone could count. Private property, he said. New laws. No more wandering herds. The boss nodded, but you saw the fear behind his eyes. The man in the hat handed him a document, turned his horse, and rode away without looking back. That night, no one spoke. The fire burned low, the herd restless in the dark. You lay awake, listening to the low hum of Tomas's voice. He was singing again, something soft, something that sounded like goodbye. By autumn, the fences started appearing, thin lines of wire that shimmered under the sun, cutting the land into pieces. You hated them. Everyone did. The cattle hated them too, tangling their hides and tearing their flesh. One night, out of pure anger, some of the boys cut through miles of it, laughing like madmen, the sparks flying off their cutters like fireflies. But by morning, more had gone up. You couldn't stop it. No one could. You rode south after that, past towns that had names now where before there'd only been grass. Schools, churches, telegraph poles marching across the prairie. Progress. Every mile felt smaller. The air felt heavier. You stopped in Abilene for supplies and saw something that stuck with you, a boy, maybe 12, standing beside a train, wearing a hat too big for his head, staring up at a poster that read, "The New West, Farms, Industry, Civilization." He looked both proud and lost, like a calf searching for its mother. You realized then what Reese had meant when he said the trail never ends. It just changes shape. You kept riding, not sure why anymore. Maybe habit, maybe defiance. The world behind you was dying, and you couldn't watch it die sitting still. Somewhere near the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, you came across a small ranch. 3 buildings, a corral, smoke rising from a chimney. A woman stood by the fence, her hair silver in the sun. She looked up as you rode closer. "You've been on the trail long?" she asked. Her voice was gentle but steady, the kind of voice that had seen too much and stopped expecting miracles. You nodded. She smiled faintly, said her husband had died 2 winters ago, the land too hard for one person to keep. You stayed a few days helping mend the roof, splitting wood, fixing her fence. She made coffee strong and black, eggs with salt that tasted like heaven. For the first time in years, you slept inside under a real roof. When you left, she pressed something into your hand, a small silver cross on a leather cord. "For luck," she said. You wore it after that, not because you believed in luck, but because it reminded you that kindness still existed somewhere beyond the dust. The last drive you ever took was in the spring of 1879. Only a handful of men signed on, most of them too old for the work, but no one said it out loud. The herd was small, the route short. The land had changed so much you barely recognized it. Telegraph wires hummed overhead. Trains howled in the distance. When you reached the stockyards, the buyers barely looked at you. Just handed over your pay and turned away, already talking numbers and shipments. You sat on a crate, the smell of blood and smoke thick in the air, and felt hollow. The trail was over, truly over this time. You rode out of town alone, the wind cold against your face. No destination, no plan. Just the sound of your horse's hooves and the whisper of the plains. Days turned into weeks, and you found yourself camping by the same river you'd crossed with Reese years ago. The grass was taller now, the water clear. You lit a small fire, watched the flames dance, and for a moment, you could almost hear the laughter of the old crew, the clang of pots, the low hum of Tomas's song. You smiled, though your eyes burned. The stars came out, one by one, the same as they'd always been. Maybe that was enough. You took out the note Claire had left you long ago. The paper soft and worn, the words faded but still there. Keep writing. You folded it once more and set it in the fire. The flames curled around it, turned it to ash. The wind carried it away. The world would go on. Railroads, cities, fences, but somewhere beyond all that, in the wide, empty silence of the land, the spirit of the trail still lived, riding the wind, wild and unbroken. And as long as the stars burned above the plains, someone, somewhere, would still hear its call. By the spring of 1881, the last whispers of the open range had already begun to fade, swallowed by wire and law and the slow march of men who measured land by acres and profit instead of by miles of wind and sky. The cattle trails were empty now, ghost paths that cut across a country too tame to remember the thunder of hoofs. You rode them anyway, out of habit more than hope, tracing old routes that only the wind seemed to remember. The world had moved on, but you hadn't. The horse beneath you was old, his coat scarred and gray around the muzzle, his gait slow but steady. You'd named him Dust because that's what everything turned into eventually. You still wore the same hat, the same coat patched and faded from sun and rain, the same boots worn thin from years of riding. Time had turned you into a shadow, one of those figures townsfolk barely noticed anymore, a relic moving through a world that no longer had a place for him. You passed new towns that had sprung up where the old trail used to run. Towns with names like Hope Springs and Junction City, places full of fresh paint and fresh faces, men in suits with ledgers instead of spurs, women in dresses too fine for the dust. The sound of hammers filled the air, trains screamed across the distance, and a land that had once felt endless now echoed with the clatter of progress. You stopped in one of those towns once, just to rest a horse and fill your canteen. The saloon was quiet, all polished wood and bright lamps, too clean for comfort. The bartender was young, barely old enough to shave. He looked you over like he wasn't sure what kind of creature you were. "You from around here?" he asked. You shook your head. "Used to be," you said, though you weren't sure what that meant anymore. He poured you a whiskey, the smell sharp, the taste weaker than it used to be. The piano in the corner was silent, its keys collecting dust. You drank slow, eyes drifting to the window where the train tracks gleamed like fresh scars in the afternoon light. You remembered the first time you'd seen a train, how the ground had trembled, how the smoke had blotted out the stars, how the sound had felt like the end of the world. Maybe it had been. You left the town before dawn, the world still gray with mist. Rode west this time, toward land that hadn't yet learned to forget. The plains opened up again, wide and wild, though smaller now, fenced in by lines of iron and wood. You followed a river for a few days, the water low and slow, the banks heavy with the scent of spring. Sometimes you thought about the others, Reese, Jeb, Tomas, Claire, and wondered if any of them would have stayed if they'd known how it all turned out. Probably not. Cowboys weren't made to stand still. You camped that night beneath a cottonwood, the air soft with the hum of insects. You built a small fire, just enough to keep the dark at bay, and stared into it until your eyes blurred. Somewhere out there, an owl called, long and low. You thought of the trails you'd ridden, the storms you'd survived, the faces you'd buried. The world had been cruel, but it had been free. Now it was neither. Morning came cold, the kind that makes your bones ache. You saddled Dust and rode toward the foothills where the grass gave way to stone. There was talk in the towns of gold still buried out there, old veins left behind by men who died chasing it. You didn't care much for gold, but you figured it was as good a direction as any. The land grew rougher, the air thinner. You passed the ruins of a homestead, a few blackened beams, a rusted stove half buried in weeds. A child's shoe lay in the dirt, small and worn through. You stared at it for a while, then rode on. There were stories in every inch of this land, and most of them ended the same way, with silence. 3 days later, you reached the mountains. Snow still clung to the peaks, gleaming under the sun like frozen fire. The valleys were green with new life, the rivers singing louder than you'd heard in years. It was quiet there, untouched, and for a moment, you almost felt like time had turned back. You set up camp by a stream, caught a trout with your hands, cooked it over the fire. The meat was sweet, the air clean. You slept better that night than you had in months. When you woke, there was a sound, soft, distant, the faint jingle of a bridle. You sat up, hand on your revolver. A rider appeared through the trees, moving slow, the sun behind him. He was young, maybe 20, wearing a new hat and a clean shirt that hadn't yet met the trail. He nodded as he approached, reining in his horse a few feet away. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here," he said. You studied him a moment, saw something familiar in the way he held the reins. Nervous, but hungry for something. "Ain't much out here to find," you said. He smiled, a little unsure. "That's what they said back home, too. Thought I'd see for myself." You poured him coffee, watched him drink it like he hadn't had a real cup in days. He said his name was Luke, from Kansas, wanted to be a cowboy. Said he'd grown up hearing stories of the old trails, of men who rode with nothing but a horse and a dream. "Guess I missed it," he said, eyes dropping. "All the real cowboys are gone." You shook your head. "Not gone," you said. "Just ghosts now." He looked at you then, really looked, and you saw it hit him, the realization that he was staring at the last of them. You laughed, though it came out rough. "Don't get too romantic about it, kid. Trail wasn't all sunsets and songs. It was hard, dirty, lonely work. You earned every sunrise with blood and dust." He nodded, but you could tell he didn't believe you. Youth never does. He stayed with you a few days, learning the small things, the way to sit a saddle for hours without breaking, how to read the sky for storms, how to listen to the land instead of talking over it. He wasn't bad, just too soft yet. But there was something in him you recognized, a kind of restless need, the same one that had driven you all those years. When he left, you gave him your old rope and a warning. "World's smaller now," you said, "but there's still room if you know where to look." He smiled, tipped his hat, and rode east into the morning. You watched until he disappeared, then turned back to the fire. Maybe that was the way of it. Old ones fading, new ones dreaming. You stayed in the mountains through summer. The world below kept changing, but up there, time stood still. Sometimes you'd ride to a ridge and watch the sun sink behind the plains, the light turning the land to gold. You could almost see the old trails then, ghost herds moving in the distance, the faint echo of hooves rising with the wind. Once, during a storm, lightning struck a nearby tree, splitting it clean in half. The sound threw you back years, to stampedes and chaos and the feeling of death breathing down your neck. When it passed, you sat there shaking, rain running down your face, and you laughed. You'd survived too much to die from fear. The next morning, you found a wild mare grazing by the stream. She was dark and lean, eyes bright with defiance. It took hours to get near her, longer still to earn her trust. But by the third day, she followed you. You named her Echo. Together, you and Dust, and Echo wandered farther west than you ever had. The land grew rougher, lonelier. Sometimes you'd go weeks without seeing another soul. You started talking to the horses just to hear a voice. But you didn't mind. Solitude had become your only friend. One night, deep in a canyon, you built a fire and took out the small silver cross the widow had given you years ago. You turned in your fingers, its surface worn smooth. You thought about her, about everyone who had crossed your path. They were all part of you now, woven into your bones, carried in your breath. Maybe that was what it meant to live long enough, to become a vessel for all the ghosts. When the first snow came, you decided to move south again. Your joints ached, your vision blurred, but you kept going. The plains welcomed you like an old friend, withered but still alive. The fences were higher now, the rail lines busier, but beyond them, the wind still sang. You rode until you reached the same river where you'd buried Reese's men years ago. The tree was still there, older, twisted by time. You dismounted, stood there a long while, hat in hand. The sky turned orange, then red, then deep blue. You felt peace. Not joy, not sorrow, just peace. You sat by the fire one last time, the stars burning cold above. The horses stood nearby, heads bowed, silent. You thought of all the miles behind you, of the dust that had become part of your blood. You smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, a coyote howled, and the sound carried through the night like a song. You closed your eyes, and in the darkness, you saw it again. The open plains, endless and golden, the herd moving slow beneath a sky too wide for walls. The laughter of men long gone, rising with the wind. The trail was still there, waiting just beyond the horizon. And in that eternal silence between earth and sky, you rode once more, forever part of the land that had made you. The sun had just begun to rise over the low hills when the trail came alive again. 1,000 longhorns stirring like waves in a restless sea, steam rising from their bodies in the cold dawn. The men were quiet, worn thin by months on the move, their faces leathered by wind and dust, their eyes hollow with that faraway look that comes from too much open sky. Reese rode ahead, his silhouette sharp against the light, the brim of his hat cutting the glow into a halo of gold. His horse's hooves made no sound on the dry earth. He moved like a shadow that had forgotten it once belonged to a man. The river ahead was narrow but swift, swollen by recent rains. It glimmered with the pale light of morning, a ribbon of glass snaking through the grasslands. Crossing meant risk. Water could take a steer or a man without warning, but there was no other way forward. "We push him through," Reese said, his voice low but steady, and the men nodded, too tired to argue. The first hooves splashed into the current, churning brown water around their legs. The sound of the herd crossing filled the air, a deep, rhythmic thunder, hooves striking stone, men shouting, whips cracking. Horses snorted, steers bellowed, and the river swallowed the noise whole. For a moment, it felt like the whole world was in motion, alive, raw, untamed. Then it happened. A steer slipped, lost its footing, and in an instant the current took it, dragging 2 others down with it. A cowboy rode after, shouting, leaning low in the saddle, trying to grab a horn or tail, but the current caught him too. His horse screamed as the water closed over its head. The men froze for half a heartbeat. Then Reese was there, shouting orders, voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. "Move! Keep being stiad. Don't you let him break you." The herd shifted, panicked, but the riders held firm, circling, driving them forward. Minutes stretched into an eternity. When it was over, 3 steers and 1 man were gone, taken downstream. The river ran quiet again, as if nothing had happened. Reese stared at the water, his jaw set, then turned away. "Get the herd moving," he said. No one spoke. The dead man's hat floated briefly along the surface before snagging on a branch and vanishing beneath the current. By noon, the land rose again, the grass shorter, the soil harder. A wind came from the north, dry and sharp, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. The sky stretched unbroken, the color of bone. They rode in silence, the herd's noise a constant heartbeat behind them. The man they'd lost, Sam Whitaker, was young, barely 20, with a crooked smile and a voice that could make a hymn sound like a confession. He'd joined the drive in Fort Worth, said he was running from something, though he never said what. Now the earth had taken him, as it takes all things in the end. That night, when camp was made, Reese said a few words by the fire, his hat held against his chest. He was a good hand, he said simply. Did his work. Died doing it. Then he nodded once, turned away, and that was the end of it. No prayers, no markers. Just the silence of the plains and the endless wind. The men sat long after, staring into the flames. The cook poured coffee that tasted like rust and regret. Someone started humming low, a tune with no words, and one by one the others joined in, until the sound became something older than speech, a morning hum for all the things lost along the trail. Days passed. The land changed again, flatter, harsher, the grass giving way to dry scrub and red dirt that clung to everything. The herd grew restless, hungry for green. They drove them slower now, conserving strength. Dust caked the men's faces, turned their sweat to mud. The air shimmered with heat. Sometimes, out on the horizon, they'd see mirages, ghost rivers, phantom trees, the shapes of towns that weren't there. A trick of light, but in that emptiness, even an illusion felt like hope. One afternoon, they came upon a small homestead, nothing more than a shack and a corral. A few chickens pecking in the dirt. A woman stood outside, hanging laundry, her face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. A boy of maybe 10 watched them from the fence, eyes wide. Reese rode ahead, raised a hand in greeting. The woman nodded but didn't smile. You seen any sign of water ahead? Reese asked. She shook her head. Dry all the way till Silver Creek, she said. 3 days, maybe 4. Her voice was flat, cautious. The boy tugged at her sleeve, whispered something. Reese nodded, tipped his hat, and rode back. The woman watched them go, her figure shrinking in the distance until she was no more than a memory against the dust. That night, the wind changed, carrying the scent of rain, but the sky stayed clear. Coyotes howled far off, their cries lonely and sharp. The men barely spoke anymore. Words felt heavy, unnecessary. Each mile took something from them, a bit of laughter, a bit of youth, until only the work remained. Reese kept his distance, watching, calculating. He was a man who carried ghosts, though he'd never say so. Some nights he'd sit apart from the fire, staring north, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Once one of the younger men, Jacob, asked him, "What you think about out there, boss?" Reese didn't look away from the dark. "I think about what I've already lost," he said, and that ended it. When they finally reached Silver Creek, it was nearly dry, a trickle running through cracked earth. The cattle pushed forward, desperate, hooves sinking into mud as they fought for what little water remained. Reese cursed under his breath. "We'll lose him if we don't move fast." They filled barrels, let the horses drink, then pressed on again, chasing the promise of the next river. But the land was dying that summer. Grass turned to dust, and every sunrise brought more heat. The horizon shimmered with mirages that mocked them. Men began to cough, their lips cracked, skin burned raw. The herd thinned. One night, when the moon hung low and red, they heard the distant roll of thunder. Real thunder. Reese's eyes narrowed. "Storm's coming," he said. The men smiled for the first time in weeks. Rain meant life. But what came wasn't mercy, it was madness. The storm hit just before dawn, a wall of wind and lightning that split the sky in two. The rain came hard, sudden, washing the dust from their faces but blinding them in sheets. The herd panicked. The earth turned to sludge beneath their feet. Men shouted, riding into chaos, trying to turn them, but the lightning drove the cattle wild. Reese's horse reared, nearly throwing him. "Get back," he shouted, his voice lost in the roar. Then the ground itself seemed to tremble. A flash of white, thunder exploded, and a steer crashed into a man, trampling him beneath the mud. Someone screamed. The herd broke, scattering in every direction. By the time dawn came, half the cattle were gone, scattered across miles of flooded plain. The survivors sat slumped in the rain, eyes hollow. Reese dismounted, his hat dripping. "We start over," he said quietly. "Round 'em up." No one argued. They worked for days, dragging what they could back together, sleeping in the mud, eating cold beans